Hey people, today we're going to be watching presidential elections in American history. And it's going to be about the election of 1908 between, as you can see, William Howard Taft and William Jennings Bryan. And if you're a historian, then you would know exactly who had won this election. I certainly do, and it's gonna be a battle of the Williams. And for some reason, whenever you see these kind of things, there's always gonna be three named candidates. There's always gonna be a three named candidate at some point. So let's just continue on with the video.
Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History. The 31st presidential election in American history took place on November 3rd, 1908. Throughout his presidency, Theodore Roosevelt had managed to gain fans from both the Republican and Democratic parties. His ideas were what we now call progressive, but by 1908, everybody seemed to want to be called progressive. It was pretty trendy. While Roosevelt didn't get as much accomplished in his second term, he remained very popular. After the last election, he promised he would not run for a third term, and instead fully endorsed his close friend and the Secretary of War, William Howard Taft, to continue the progressive reforms that he had started. Even though Taft had much rather be on the Supreme Court than be president, he couldn't turn Roosevelt down. The Republican nomination process marked the first time a presidential preference primary happened, where delegates were chosen from multiple states. At the convention, most Republicans would do whatever Roosevelt recommended, and Taft was officially nominated. Although Roosevelt seemed to get more cheers than he did, a lot of them really wanted Roosevelt to run again after all. They nominated James Sherman, a U.S. representative from New York, as Taft's running mate. Perhaps the main reason why William Jennings Bryan did not run for president in 1904 is because he agreed with Roosevelt on many issues. In fact, perhaps Roosevelt stole some of his ideas. Now that Roosevelt was out of the picture, Bryan actually argued he was the more logical successor to Roosevelt than Taft. Despite the fact that Bryan had lost the previous two times he ran, he remained very popular, and the Democratic Party went with him again. Third time's a charm, right? The Democrats nominated John Kern, a former member of the Indiana Senate, as Bryan's running mate. While there were at least 5 third parties who tried for nationwide campaigns in 1908, the two biggest were the Socialist Party and the Prohibition Party. Just like in 1904. The Socialist Party nominated Eugene Debs again for president. Like Bryan, he had also lost twice before. Third time's a charm, right? Just like in 1904, Ben Hanford, the printer based out of New York, was Debs' running mate. The Prohibition Party nominated Eugene Chafin, a lawyer originally from Wisconsin, for president, with Aaron Watkins, an education administrator, lawyer, and minister from Ohio, as his running mate. This was another battle of the Williams. William Jennings Bryan ran another intense campaign filled with much traveling and speeches, but the Free Silver movement was no longer strong, so this time he spoke out against the special interests in Washington. His slogan was, "Shall the people rule?" But like Roosevelt, William Howard Taft's platform had many of the same solutions as Bryan. Taft's campaign used the slogan, "Vote for Taft now, you can vote for Bryan anytime," sarcastically referring to Bryan's 2 past failed campaigns. Oh snap, shady. This would be the first presidential election Oklahoma could participate in, as they were now a state. And here are the results. William Howard Taft won, becoming the 27th president in American history. Taft won pretty handily. He received 321 electoral votes and 51.6% of the popular vote. William Jennings Bryan finished second place yet again. It was his worst defeat yet, and he wouldn't run for president again after this. He received 162 electoral votes and 43% of the popular vote. Looking at this map, you can see that Taft did well mostly in the north and out out west. But Bryan did well in the South again, and better in new random regions all over the country. Bryan's support was more diverse than ever, yet still too short. Eugene Debs came in third again with 2.8% of the popular vote. Eugene Chafin finished fourth with 1.7% of the popular vote. James Sherman became the 27th vice president in American history. And so it was Taft to continue the legacy of Teddy Roosevelt. But would Teddy approve of how his good friend did as president? Find out in the next episode.
65.4% of the population voted in this election.
See you for the next election, buddy.
Mr. Beast. Okay? Okay, so now we're going to watch the election of 1912. William Howard Taft, Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, and Eugene Debs. Here we go.
Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History. The 32nd presidential election in American history took place on November 5th, 1912. Oh yeah, this was the election that was completely and utterly messed up. It was weird, man. Really weird. How weird? Well, look at that electoral map, for crying out loud. What the heck is that? But I'm ahead of myself. Let's go back a bit. The Taft presidency was supposed to be Theodore Roosevelt 2.0. But right off the bat, it just wasn't that way. Taft was like his own person. He fired cabinet members that Roosevelt had approved of or appointed. While Taft continued to fight trusts, he placed less of a commitment to conservation, labor unions, and restrictions on the employment of women and children. Soon there was a clear split in the Republican Party between the more conservative-leaning Republicans led by Taft and the progressive Republicans led by Teddy Roosevelt. After traveling around the world with his family for more than a year, Roosevelt came home to one of the biggest receptions ever given in New York City. Initially neutral about giving his opinion about how his friend was doing as president, that changed when eventually a bunch of progressive Republicans had convinced Roosevelt to run against Taft in 1912. The Republicans expanded their primaries to include even more delegates from across the country to the National Convention to choose their nominee. Going into the convention, Roosevelt actually had more delegates than Taft did. Taft's people, however, controlled the convention and essentially shut out many of the Roosevelt delegates. This, of course, made Roosevelt very angry, and he and his supporters stormed out of the convention. Not since the election of 1872 had there been such a major divide within the Republican Party. In fact, Roosevelt and his supporters completely abandoned the Republicans, 2 weeks later meeting up to create their own political party called the Progressive Party. These progressives nominated Roosevelt for president, well, duh, and Hiram Johnson, the governor of California, as his running mate. At the convention, Roosevelt passionately promoted what he called a new nationalism. Their platform sought a minimum wage for women, an 8-hour workday, a child labor law, a social security system, a national health service, and the direct election of U.S. senators, among other things. Afterward, Roosevelt told reporters he felt as strong as a bull moose. After that, the Progressive Party became popularly known as the Bull Moose Party. Despite the excitement of the Bull Moose Party, the Republicans pressed on with Taft as their candidate and James Sherman again as his running mate. Believe it or not, Sherman was the first incumbent vice president to be nominated for re-election since John Calhoun way back in 1828. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party, who hadn't done so well in presidential elections since, I don't know, before the Civil War, saw this major split of the Republican Party as a golden opportunity. They had a bit of drama as well at their own convention. Originally, it looked like Champ Clark, the Speaker of the House from Missouri, was going to be the guy, but he failed to get the 2/3 majority needed to secure the nomination. In second place was Woodrow Wilson, the governor of New Jersey. Wilson didn't really think he had a chance, but then William Jennings Bryan decided to endorse him, and Bryan still had a lot of fans, so he had a lot of influence. On the 46th ballot, that's right, I said 46th, Wilson was nominated. with Thomas Marshall, the governor of Indiana, as his running mate. So that's it? Oh, heck no. In 1912, Eugene Debs ran for president a fourth time, trying to keep together a socialist party that was also splintering. Debs was by this time a recognizable name across the nation, and his running mate was Emil Seidel, the former mayor of Milwaukee, the first ever socialist mayor of an American city, as a matter of fact. The Prohibition Party responded to Eugene running again by having their Eugene run again. Eugene Chafin gave it a second try with Aaron Watkins again as his running mate. The campaigns were dominated by the rivalry between Taft and Roosevelt, former friends who now seem like bitter enemies. With those two fighting, the election looked to be a lock for Wilson, which was lucky for the Democrats because Wilson wasn't the most charismatic person. Teddy Roosevelt was, but critics said he was running more for his ego and for spoiling the election for the Republicans than for actually reforming the country. Roosevelt campaigned like crazy, traveling around 10,000 miles and visiting 34 states. While he was in Milwaukee, an unemployed saloon keeper named John Schrank shot him right before he was about to give a speech. As it turns out, the bullet did not penetrate his chest. Reportedly, both his steel eyeglass case and his 50-page folded copy of the speech in his pocket maybe saved his life. Anyway, rather than, go to the hospital, Roosevelt decided to give the speech anyway. He began his speech saying, quote, "Friends, I shall ask you to be as quiet as possible. I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot." Unquote. He went on to finish that 90-minute speech like a bull moose indeed. This election marked the first time New Mexico and Arizona participated in a presidential election, as they both became states earlier that year. As election day drew near, things were not looking so good for Taft. To make matters worse, less than a week before the election, Vice President Sherman died. Sherman is the last vice president to have died while in office. And here are the results. Woodrow Wilson won, becoming the 28th president in American history. Even though he had less votes than William Jennings Bryan ever had, he still easily won. He received 435 electoral votes and 41.8% of the popular vote. Coming in second was Teddy Roosevelt, who received 88 electoral votes and 27.4% of the popular vote. This was the last presidential election in which a candidate who was not a Republican or Democrat came in second place in either the Electoral College or popular vote. In third place, William Howard Taft, with just 8 electoral votes and 23.2% of the popular vote. With so many former Republicans joining the Progressive Party, this resulted in the Republicans suffering their worst presidential defeat in history. Taft suffered the worst ever defeat of any president trying to get re-elected. Interestingly, both Taft and Roosevelt lost their home states. In fourth place, Eugene Debs got 6% of the popular vote. In fifth, Eugene Chafin got 1.4% of the popular vote. Thomas Marshall became the 28th vice president in American history. Wilson would become the only Democrat president between 1896 and 1932, and only the second of 2 Democrats elected president between 1860 and 1932. Obviously, the Republican split had benefited him greatly, as he won several states that historically had voted for the Republican candidate. This election marked the only time since 1860 in which 4 different candidates each got more than 5% of the popular vote. Also, it was the only election in which a third-party candidate did better than one of the major parties. Again, now look at this map. What the heck?
58.8% of the population voted this election. Jesus, I'm tired. Okay, guys, I'm gonna end it here. So, alright, guys, so I'm gonna end it here. And, hope you learned something new today. And, bye.